And good evening once again. Day 142 of the Biden administration. The breaking news we begin with tonight is this blockbuster piece of reporting by the New York Times. It says Trump Justice Department officials investigated the electronic communications of Democrats in Congress, all in the hunt for leaks of classified information. Quote, prosecutors subpoenaed Apple for data from the accounts of at least 2 Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, aides, and family members. One was a minor. Records of at least a dozen people tied to the committee were seized in 2017 and early 18, including those of Representative Adam Schiff of California, then the panel's top Democrat, and now its chairman. Times reporter Katie Benner shares a byline on this story. She is indeed standing by to join us in a moment. Earlier this evening, Congressman Schiff spoke to Rachel Maddow on this network about the unprecedented and disturbing nature of all of it.
This looks like a patent abuse of the department. Yet another example of the president politicizing, using the Department of Justice as a cudgel to go after his enemies. The first most important norm post-Watergate is the President of the United States does not get involved in particular cases at the Justice Department. The President of the United States doesn't urge the department to investigate his political adversaries or his political enemies. Beyond that, you have the specter of a president who is himself under investigation by our committee, calling for an unprecedented subpoenas for account information pertaining to members of Congress. That is, I think, a terrible abuse of power. It violates, I think, the separation of powers, but it also makes the Department of Justice just a fully owned subsidiary of the president's personal legal interests.
Indeed, once the news was out tonight, Schiff called for the Justice Department's own Inspector General to investigate this investigation. California Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, another outspoken critic of Donald Trump and a former impeachment manager, confirmed to CNN minutes ago his records were also seized.
I was notified, Don, by Apple that they did seize my records. It's wrong. This is what they do. They smear and they try and clear. We've seen this through the Justice Department by Donald Trump, whether it was the reason he was impeached for trying to go after Vice President Biden at the time, or just other efforts, through the Mueller investigation. And I support Chairman Schiff's call for an Inspector General report into not only this conduct, but other conduct that was corrupt by Donald Trump.
Coming up on Morning in Europe, there's been no comment as of yet from the traveling Biden White House. Let's get right to it with one of the co-authors of this piece. Katie, your piece mentions 2 Trump attorneys general who were involved in this. Tell us, what were they searching for specifically, and how did this unfold, or is the chain of command clearly in front of us?
Sure. Well, we have to step back in time to 2017, just in the dawn of the Trump administration, when we saw a spate of classified information be released into the press in the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and others, detailing things like the evidence of the existence of the Russia investigation, of the fact that the FBI was looking into whether or not people related to the Trump campaign should be scrutinized, and into conversations between former Ambassador Kislyak from Russia and, President Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn. These were devastating stories to the White House. They threw the White House into chaos. And there was a lot of pressure, first on Attorney General Jeff Sessions, later on Attorney General Bill Barr, to figure out who was the source of these stories. And as part of that investigation, you saw the Justice Department cast an extremely wide net that included almost every single Obama-era national security official and eventually members of the House Intelligence Committee, but really what seems to be just the Democrats on that committee. And that is where we see the Justice Department take extraordinary steps, including subpoenaing from Apple the electronic communications metadata of Adam Schiff, who was the ranking member at the time, Eric Swalwell, their staff members, their family members of the staff members, including one child. So this was an extraordinary step. We've talked to current and former Justice Department officials. We've spoken with current and former members of Congress who say they have not really heard of anything like this being done in the course of a leak investigation. And we also know that in order for a member of Congress to face this kind of scrutiny, you really do need the awareness of the top reaches of the Justice Department, especially in an organization where people continually want to make sure they have top cover for controversial decisions. People are not going to make a decision like this to seek this kind of subpoena without higher and higher and higher approval.
Frank Figliuzzi, I fear it's going to become kind of a cable news drinking game over the next 24 to 48 hours to call this Nixonian. When you think about it, however, wherever Dick Nixon is tonight, whether it's to our north or to our south, I bet you a good amount of money he's sitting back saying that's more than I ever got out of my DOJ. Well done to whoever organized this. Tell our audience just how bad this is. And while you're at it, since we're going to hear the word metadata a lot, please define that for the rest of us.
Sure. Yeah, this is bad. And here's why. It appears that President Trump had a blacklist of enemies that seemingly included only Democrats. And now we learn particularly on the House Intelligence Committee. And so he then, that's one thing. But then he chose to use the Department of Justice as kind of his personal goon squad to go after the people on that enemies list, on that blacklist. And here's where this goes really south quickly with investigatively and from a rule of law standpoint. You need predication in order to request, seek a subpoena and seek the records of anybody in a leak investigation, but in particular, members of the House Intelligence Community. You need to understand who is within the universe of people that had lawful access to that leaked classified material, most likely did it. And what is your predication to believe that? Simply saying, I don't like him, her, and then even going so far as to subpoena their kids' phone records because, maybe they might be using that kid's phone to circumvent investigative efforts. That, in my memory, and I've tried racking my brain since this news came out, I don't recall anything like that ever happening before. And for lawyer after lawyer under Barr, under Sessions, to think this was okay, I believe puts them outside the scope of their employment. I think they may be personally liable because they were so outside the regulations. They could be personally liable for lawsuit. What does metadata mean? They're not getting the content. This isn't a wiretap of the phone conversations of these House members. It is their phone bill. It is their phone records, who dialed them, and who they dialed. And that's how you would presumably find a reporter's phone number that they called or got a call from and shared information with. And the only reason we're finding out about this and the reason why they broke their own rules is because the gag order wasn't renewed by the current Justice Department. And so Apple was free to go ahead and tell these members what had been happening.
Jeremy Bash, let's put your lawyer hat on and pick up on one of the points Frank just made. Put this in context. How dangerous was DOJ under Donald Trump? And can anyone be prosecuted for what we've just learned about?
Well, this was an abuse of power, plain and simple. There was absolutely no basis for the Trump Justice Department to investigate Democrats who were duty-bound under our system with conducting oversight over the Trump administration. And by thwarting or attempting to thwart oversight, by trying to intimidate Democratic members of Congress with leak investigations or threats of criminal prosecution, I think the Trump administration showed its true colors in undermining the rule of law, undermining democratic principles, small d democratic principles, and undermining the separation of powers and our constitutional foundations. And so, nothing could be more egregious, Brian, and I fear we're going to only learn in the days and weeks ahead more evidence of how the Trump administration abused the system to protect Donald Trump. And I've been involved with several investigations involving sensitive information going back since 9/11. It is true that grand juries have been impaneled and members of Congress have been questioned in certain leak investigations. But like Frank, I cannot recall a single time when metadata or content or any records were sought on members of Congress. I think this is an abuse of power to involve families, to have Bill Barr elongate unnecessarily the investigation to placate Donald Trump. There are so many red flags here. This is going to require extensive investigation and, to your point, potentially accountability.